They said the town knew every sound the sea could make, the gulls, the grind of sand, the rattle of chain. But at dawn, one week in September, the kelp sang a name, and a man was not there to answer it.
Imagine standing on a low deck while the tide pulls your world apart. Wet ropes underfoot. A horizon that looks like an unmade bed. Then, beneath the waterline, a layered humming, soft as breath and lower than any wail, that shapes itself into a name you know.
I'm Samnang. Find somewhere dark and quiet. Put your headphones on. Listen closely now. Tonight's story is called The Kelp Choir.
I began to think the sea wasn't just making sound. It was keeping accounts, and listening sometimes pays your debt. The town sits in a fold of rocky coast the maps mostly ignore. One stretch of breakwater, a cluster of clapboard houses, a diner that opens when the boats come in.
People move by tide as much as by clock. Nets at dawn, repairs at noon, gossip at the harbor rail. Elias and Jonah fit into that rhythm. You could tell the town by the way they moved.
You don't drag through it unless you mean to, Elias told me, fingers still smelling of diesel. He kept his jaw like it was a hinge that never loosened. Jonah, young, loud, always a joke ready, moved like he thought the ocean owed him something. Do you feel that? That small click where a place becomes a character? This town was one of those places. At first, the choir was a joke. Hear that? Sounds like the kelp's got a throat, a deckhand said over coffee, and everyone laughed. Wind, gulls, and that's it, the grocer shrugged, pulling his cap down. But later that morning, Jonah found a small wooden token coiled on the starboard, smoothed by salt, carved with a single letter, barnacles like a cricket face. They tucked it in the tool locker like a charm and kept working.
A few days on, men on a lee of rocks heard the hum again. It pulsed with the water, but it threaded, low, layered, and once it folded into Jonah's name. Not like a person says it, one fisherman told me later. Like the sea was trying to teach itself who we are. Ooh.
Nature makes sounds, the grocer said, a week later, and he sounded tired, not mocked. Wind, gulls, it's nothing. But 5 days after that, he didn't sound so sure when his boy found that little whistle on the rocks, and it hummed the same thin note.
Then a radio log surfaced. Static, and a syllable pattern that glued itself into something too regular to be random tide noise. Cleaned up, it revealed a cadence like a name. The police called it an acoustic oddity. The harbor bar called it a ghost. The town called it trouble.
Small things began to shift. Lines washed ashore, braided like hair. Buoys returned with barnacles that, when you squinted, made shapes. Letters, curves, a map made of growth. A child's wooden whistle washed up, humming a single low note. People started talking about old rituals. Lobsters fed a scrap of bread. A song hummed into the waves. The sea keeps accounts, an elder at the diner told me. It keeps your name. It doesn't like being forgotten.
2 weeks in, the pattern hardened. Boats radioed in, singing kelp near moorings. A friend of Elias called, voice thin. He'd seen light moving across the kelp and heard a voice call a name that wasn't his. The signal cut. Elias and a handful of others motored out at dawn with lanterns, following sound into a hollow the charts didn't mark. The water there smelled older, bilge, and something metallic.
They found Jonah's jacket, folded and weighted with stones. A logbook lay half submerged on the rail. The final entry wasn't Jonah's hand. It read like a note left for someone who already knew the tide's rules. You promised. We remember. Tonight you answer. The timestamp didn't match what the men said they'd seen. Either someone had altered time on paper, or the sea had rearranged the story.
At that point, the sentence kept returning in whispers around the harbor. The sea keeps accounts. Repeat it with me in your head. The sea keeps accounts. And you'll hear how a small phrase becomes an accusation.
Lanterns bobbed like slow heartbeats.
The kelp hummed under the hull, a choir you could feel in your teeth.
This is the moment.
It began to mimic them. A laugh that wasn't Jonah's, but the town's memory of Jonah's laugh. A phrase Jonah used when he tied a knot. Names folded into the hum like notes in a dirge. Men gripped rails and tried to name what they'd heard. Breath caught. Something in the kelp matched the pattern of their lives back at them, slightly off, like a reflection seen through old glass.
Under the kelp, barnacles grew in shapes, not random, but arranged like letters when seen from above. Buttons, a whistle, the carved token, stitched into the sea like entries in a ledger. A diver later told me it looked like the ocean was filing memory by item and sound. Only it files us by sound, he said, and he didn't laugh.
One by one, the men who listened too long came back different, quieter, hands always checking pockets, avoiding the lee. 2 did not come back. Their boats returned, nets heavy. Radios held ordinary fragments, someone whistling, a call for dinner, and then empty static. The harbor learned a new measure of grief.
Investigators were careful. No signs of struggle, no footprints on slick rocks leading away. Forensics took samples of barnacle growth. Scientists suggested trapped air in kelp could create harmonics. The practical fishermen tied bells to rails and kept children from the waterline after dark. Some wanted to clear the beds. Others left offerings. None of it answered the simplest, strangest question. What does the ocean do with names?
In the aftermath, the phrase returned again and again. The sea keeps accounts. This time as a warning and a prayer. Men smoothed photographs with salt-rough fingers. A small memorial grew on a rock shelf, a whistle, a token, a photo of Jonah pinned down with a stone. The town rearranged itself around the absence, inventing rituals to feel safe and rituals to remember.
Months later, a child's toy washed ashore, a tiny blue boat. The paint bubbled from water. Inside, beneath barnacle crust, someone had rubbed a loop of twine and carved a name with a nail. When the mother wound the toy, a thin humming leaked out. It sounded like a lullaby learned underwater, and beneath it, a voice, uncertain, as if remembering how to be human, said the child's name.
There are reasonable explanations, and there are stories people live with to make sense of loss. Maybe the kelp made harmonics. Maybe the barnacles grew by chance. Maybe human grief folded meaning into randomness. But back in that harbor, people altered how they moved through the world. They checked boats twice. They spoke names aloud at dusk. They left bread at the waterline. And sometimes, when the tide pulled, someone would stop and listen because they didn't want the sea to tuck their names away without a record. If you're still here, take a breath. Look at your room. The sea keeps its own hours, and in that town, people learned to listen differently. They learned that curiosity can cost you, and that forgetting is often what the water collects most eagerly. Do you feel that? Elias asked me once, and I could hear him tuning himself to a world where the tide kept tally.
If this one stayed with you, pass it to someone who listens in the dark. And keep an eye on the people who go out with the tide.
I'm Samnang. Until next time, check the corners, keep your eyes open, and your lights, maybe not too bright. Good night.